Hello, OKC Thunder Nation,
Yeah.
Coach Bryan Clinton enthusiasts, people who are not sure what to think about OU football and leaning even further into the Oklahoma City Thunder. So much so that I even changed the intro of the pod for the first time in over a year. This is probably the podcast for you, and it looks like it's also the podcast for my co-host, Bryan Clinton. Bryan, I didn't tell you before we started recording. I love the hat.
Oh, appreciate
love
it.
the hat.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm jealous. I need that hat. I need it.
Well, I bought this hat at my first playoff game last year and first ever NBA playoff game last year, and yeah, pretty fun experience. So.
Hey, want to know? I'm annoyed because our good friend Ryan Chapman from Sooners on SI, he and I have season tickets for the Thunder this year, and we haven't got to go to a game yet. We're not going to be able to go tonight because we're recording this on Wednesday. Not going to be able to go tonight because of OU football availability, which only irks me a little. And then there's another game on Friday against the Suns. Can't go. I have a gig. And then, so Sunday will be our first home game to get to go to together. Fingers crossed. And Bryan, I got to tell you, Chet Holmgren goes out with a hip injury. Awful. I'm still sad. But you know what this Thunder team did without their big man, without a big man, without their arguably, at worst, their second most important player? You know what they did on Monday night? They went out and won. They said injuries be damned.
Yeah, they did.
We're going to go out and win. They beat the Clippers. You know who can't say the same thing, Bryan? You like that segue?
A good one.
You know you can't say the same? That's the Oklahoma Sooners, Bryan.
Yeah.
That's the Oklahoma Sooners, who lost somehow on Saturday to Missouri, 30-23. We were there. Feels like a fever dream that we were there. Bryan, I told you before we started recording, I'm like exhausted. I'm wiped out from that trip.
Yeah.
And part of it was having to change my quick takeaway story that I published right after the game because I had to change it a billion times because it looked like OU was going to win. Then it looked like they might go to overtime. Or it looked like they were going to lose. Then it looked like they were going to win. Then it looked like it might go to overtime.
Yep.
Then they lost.
Yep.
I figure we should talk about what that loss means, and I think a lot of people are trying to piece together what Brent Venables' future looks like. That's the reality. We've skirted around it, but I think that's where we're at, and at the very least, that's what a lot of people are talking about. And I think the best way to kind of segue that, Bryan, is last night or yesterday, I should say, there was a Board of Regents meeting. An OU Board of Regents meeting where Joe Castiglione, Athletic Director Joe Castiglione, and OU President Joseph Faraz met with the media afterwards, and they were both asked point blank about their confidence in Brent Venables. And it's a reasonable question given that Oklahoma is 5-5 on the year. They're 1-5 in conference play. They've lost 4 straight conference games. I'm not going to read the full quotes. I'm just going to read a snippet of it. Joe Castiglione, quote, this is from Eric Bailey of the Tulsa World. Obviously, the season thus far has not gone as we hoped or planned. That's disappointing to a lot of people, including us, even considering the significant challenges for the players and the coaches who have invested so much in the season so far. We're mindful that we haven't met the Oklahoma standard for 2024. That said, we truly believe in Coach Venables and our team. Then Joseph Faraz, a little bit later, said the belief in Venables right now is unwavering. However, Eric Bailey did make sure to note, our good friend Eric Bailey, despite how much he teases me, our good friend Eric Bailey did ask Joe Castiglione straight up, can you say right now definitively that Brent Venables will be back in 2025? Joe Castiglione said, as of right now, we're looking at everything, is basically what he said. I'll get the full quote on that in a second. Bryan, I don't really know what to make of all of that, because I think in one way they kind of had to say some of that, right? I mean, Brent Venables is under contract for through 2029.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
on the flip side, it's an important. The questions had to be asked, given that Oklahoma is 5-5, coming off maybe the worst loss of the Venables era. I think the only thing that compares is maybe 22 against West Virginia.
Yeah.
But I think it was a question that had to be asked. And Bryan, before I turn it over to you, I should have had this pulled up. Eric Bailey asked, "Can you say definitively that basically Joe Castiglione was non-committal?" I don't know. What do you make of all that? What do you make of those quotes?
Um, well, first of all, I think you're right. Some of that stuff, it's funny to call it coach talk, but that's what it is. It's things that have to be said in front of a mic. You knew they were going to be asked, regardless of what announcement was made. If there was any sort of newsworthy things coming out of the Board of Regents meeting, you knew that the main question was going to be something about Brent Venables and his future, given just how loud the noise has grown at this point. So, yeah, some of that definitely is coach speak, but I did, I did like if I'm Brent Venables or if I'm somebody that believes Brent Venables is still the right guy. I did like how President Harris said, as far as his commitment to Venables, it's 100%. To me, that the way that I view this, the lens that I view this through is as long as Oklahoma doesn't put out a 35-6 loss in both games, as long as it's not blowouts, as long, those kinds of results would make this perception almost to the point where the administration doesn't have a choice. To me, it feels like how they would like for this to go is we knew this was going to be a difficult season. Injuries didn't go our way. There's at least a path to giving Venables another year if they can sell the powers that be on that. And to me, it feels like that's what's going on. Now, the reason you have to leave the door open and you can't be committal about it is if Alabama comes into Norman and beats Oklahoma 42-3, and then you go and lay an egg on the road again at LSU, it's going to be really, really difficult to have any confidence in that guy. If you're a a donor or whoever it is, that makes it hard. So I think it was the right play, and I think it kind of paints the picture that you're kind of hearing out of Norman, which is Brent Venables is our guy as of right now.
And I think that's to give the full, because I don't want to misquote anything or misstate anything. Eric asked him, "Can you say right now that Coach Venables will be back in 2025?" Joe C's answer was, "As I just said, we're focusing on all the areas of improvement that are necessary now and for next year." It's not about, I'm not trying to put words in Joe C's mouth or force any, but like that is not, it's not committal. That is the
Right.
very definition of not committal. I'll tell you this, along with what you just said. I think the ideal thing, I think the thing that they want is to give Brent Venables one more offseason. I think that's what they want.
Which is because I'll tell you, I cannot stand. I can't stand how much college football has become an instant gratification sport.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that. It eats me up to the core that if a coach doesn't come in and have immediate success, we're going to kick the can down the road and hire somebody else. It bugs me to no end. And as much grief as they caught for the sign stealing thing, for Michigan to get it done after Jim Harbaugh went through that rough patch at the beginning of his tenure, that was like, look, guys, look, it still works. If you give guys time, they will get things put together. There are good football coaches out there that just need time. And I don't want to start that rant because that's a whole nother discussion. But um, yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable to ask for a fourth year, but that's just me.
I wouldn't disagree. And look, I think before we dive too much farther into this, I think it's important to note that we're talking about people, right? We're talking about human beings with jobs that have families, and so it's always kind of a difficult thing to talk about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've talked with Brent several times over the last 3 years. He has been the head coach of the program that I cover for 3 of the last 4 years. I mean, I've asked him plenty of questions throughout the last 3 years. Um, I will. I'll say this, Bryan. This is basically what Oklahoma is staring at is everything that you just said, which is, and to kind of put it in a different context, it's like I think the dilemma you have right now is if you pull the trigger, are you doing it too early? And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't pull the trigger, are you doing it too late?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I put this in the context of it's really difficult to evaluate this season, Bryan, because of the injuries. And also if you're thinking about it from a head coach perspective, did Brent Venables fumble the ball at the end of the fourth quarter?
Right.
No. No, he didn't.
Yep.
Did he I mean, did he make Jackson Arnold throw for 74 yards in a college football game in the year of our Lord 2024? No. Was he on the field when Missouri drove 75 yards in 8 plays to tie the game in 57 seconds? No, he wasn't.
Right.
It's never fair to put everything on a head coach. It's not. At the same time, Bryan, and this isn't even about making necessarily a judgment for the year moving forward. It is abysmal that Oklahoma lost that game on Saturday.
Yeah.
Like completely and utterly abysmal. It just
Yes.
is. It just is. It is.
And as much as he wasn't responsible for the turnovers and the inefficiency in the passing game and the 75-yard drive, it's very hard to argue that the issues that happened in that game aren't things that have persisted over the last few years.
It's the same stuff.
It is. And this is a difficult and this is going to be probably, I would imagine this will probably be one of the more emotional podcasts you'll get out of me, because I do 100% believe that Coach Venables has the right stuff. Um, I believe he has the right stuff it takes to be one of those top guys in the country. I do. He is as detail oriented and married to the process as anybody you're going to find. Um, he lives, eats, sleeps, and breathes football, and he has the respect of everybody he's ever worked with. There's just, you're not going to find a guy that has anything bad to say about Brent Venables from a personal perspective. Um, the only thing that you hear is he's difficult to work with sometimes, and that's because he holds people to a high standard. Like, I mean, if that's your one flaw, then I think you're doing okay. What is frustrating is that this team that's been under Brent Venables for 3 years, you hear about the culture, you hear about how tight knit the locker room is, how strong the bonds are with all of these guys. Um, but at the end of the day, your culture has to translate onto the field, and there have to be results. And right now, Brent Venables is staring down the barrel of a 5-7 season, and it would be his second losing season in 3 years at OU, and he hasn't fared well against ranked opponents. Um, I believe I saw it was like 1-11 against ranked opponents, which is just wild. So Look, man, I the way that I look at the Missouri game is, first of all, the last 2 minutes of that football game, the last 3.5 minutes of that football game, uh, the most wild roller coaster of emotions I have ever felt. Like I was drained whenever I was asking questions to players. I was mentally drained. I can't imagine how difficult that had to have been for a Jackson Arnold or a Danny Stutzman
The
or
post game
Billy.
was abysmal.
Yeah, it was
Post game
just,
was
you
abysmal.
could just really feel these guys like it. I mean, you could tell that some of them had been, in tears and like that. I mean, just truly gutted from this. And that, God, that hurts. I know that that hurts. And at the end of the day, this was a game that they needed to win. Like
Yeah.
you needed it. Like
Yeah.
if you were going to get to a bowl game realistically, that was the one team left on the schedule that, as far as things playing out for you to have an opportunity, they had injuries that they were having to deal with, just like Oklahoma is. And now you're looking at two teams that are pretty healthy coming up, um, that are in contention for SEC title. Uh, Competition. They're right there in that race, and it's just going to be tough. So, yeah, the Missouri game, the way that they lost, uh, that one's going to sting for a while, and to overcome that, for that not to be the narrative that this season uh, is encompassed with after things are said and done, it's going to take an upset in one of those last two games to overrule that. And I just, right now, I don't have any confidence that that's going to be something that can happen.
I don't have the right answer for people in terms of what should they do about Brent Venables' future. I don't have the right answer. I think you can make a lot of. I think you could make a lot of rational arguments. And then I think also on whatever side you want to argue. I also think you have to acknowledge that there's going to be a lot of factors at play. How do the donors feel about everything that's going on right now?
Right.
How does the administration feel about everything that's going on right now? And yeah, plus those factors of if you the inevitable question, and I've said this before, Bryan, on this podcast many times, anytime you want to have a coach fired, you have to ask, who are you bringing in to replace him? You always have to think about that. Just
Yep.
always. Like
Yep.
that, you can't say, oh, we'll figure that out. Let's just do this. That's how you end up like Nebraska. And that's how you end up like several other programs that keep not only kicking the can down the road, but keep on looking for those immediate results.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you do, I think, in this era more than any other era, Bryan, you do run the risk of things growing stale very quickly.
Yes.
Um, I will say this. Like I said, I'm pretty confident that I think their ideal scenario, depending on what happens these last two games, I think their ideal scenario is to give Brent Venables one more year, one more
Yep.
offseason.
Yep.
And here's the thing, and I think this is going to go with the quarterback discussion we're going to have in just a minute. If you stick with Brent Venables, and let's just talk about this from a right or wrong standpoint, that's irrelevant. Let's talk about this from if you're going to do that, you have to fully commit as an administration and as a donor base, because you're not only looking for a new offensive coordinator, you might be looking for other position coaches. You are going to have to probably deal with some decent roster turnover through the portal or players going to the NFL. Not to mention, you're going to be replacing your leaders on this football team, whether that's Danny Stutzman or Billy Bowman, and other guys. You're going to have to look at, what do you do at offensive line? Like, what are you doing at quarterback? Like, all of a sudden, you're facing these huge, huge, huge questions that you can't give half-assed answers to.
Right.
So I think ultimately, the message should be, if you move forward with this, and I think that argument can be made that it's the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to. I not only do I think the administration would have to be fully behind that, but I think there would also have to be clear expectations and no communicated and no questions about
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would have to be, does Brent know that if they start next year 3-3, that it's done?
Yeah.
You know, like what, like, is that a possibility or not? Like, all this stuff has to be aligned. And this is the last thing I'll say, Bryan, in terms of the one judgment I'll make about right or wrong is it's really difficult to evaluate everything that has taken place in Brent Venables' 3 years. There's a lot of stuff has happened. So much stuff has happened. And a lot of it is not necessarily in his control. Losing that game against Missouri and what it means for this season, the microcosm that it is for Venables' tenure and what it can mean moving forward, you had to win that game.
Yep.
Had to. And
Yep.
there's no excuse not to. Missouri is not a very good football team. I'm sorry for any Missouri fans that are out there, especially with Drew Pine at quarterback. You're not a very good football team.
Yeah.
And that says more about Oklahoma than it does about Missouri.
Right. Well, and as I look at this, I want to put it nuts on the table. Is he gone? My answer is no. My answer is no. I right now, I think at this point he's back, and this is why. I think the one guy out there right now, if you were, let's play this devil's advocate. Um, if you were gonna go out there and hire somebody, the obvious candidate is Signetti from Indiana, right? Like that's kind of the big one. I one I like that hire potential, but I think the narrative around him is going to change a lot after they play Ohio State. I think that like that's just going. It is what it is. That's going to be a tough game for Indiana. I think things change a little bit. Um, Two, if that's your only guy, and you get him in, you make the decision to fire the guy you're going with, and you bring him in here, and maybe his philosophies don't match up well. Maybe if that's the one guy you're banking on, this class, this coaching carousel coming up probably is not going to be as full of as what we've seen the last few years. You got a lot of guys on in new contracts. There's been a lot of movement. A lot of the big names out there have found spots. I think it's just a tough time to make that decision. You also would owe Brent Venables over $44 million because of his contract. And that's a lot. And what people don't understand or don't think about is, yes, we saw Texas A&M pay the buku dollars to get rid of Jimbo Fisher when they did. There's a reason why Billy Napier and Dave Aranda are probably keeping their jobs this year. The ruling, the new ruling, the new settlement from the NCAA, $2.8 billion in damages being funded. That's going to cost every school over the next however many years $20 million a year to current and former players to pay that their part of that. And so money's tighter than it was. You also have the NIL issue. If you're going to put all that money out there to fire Brent Venables, is it going to come at a loss for what you're able to put in the NIL for this class? I think there's just so many things, regardless of the emotional factor of being upset with where Oklahoma's program is right now. I think there's just way too many factors going in the other direction that make right now the wrong time to do it. If that is how you feel about the guy. If you feel that Venables is not the right guy for the program, I think the timing right now just makes it too difficult for that to be the time to pull the plug.
All good points. Those are fair. I'll say two other things. As far as your original question, is Brent Venables back next year? Pure speculation. My guess is yes. And that's based on a few things. Some of it is what you just laid out. The money reasons, also just the chaos it could potentially throw into the program. Not to mention the lack of
Yeah.
obvious, not to mention the lack of obvious answers in terms of how you replace him, and also what that would mean for the program, what it would mean for the roster. But like all, I think doing it now just throws. You better have answers for the billion things that come up if you let him go.
Right.
Not to mention, it's not like it's been all awful. The defense looks good outside of that bad drive at the end of the fourth quarter. The defense is obviously better. But the other thing I'll say, Bryan, is I think what's also going to be, I think, deserving to be thought about through all of this is the decision to extend Brent Venables this last summer before the season started. Because just like, and we're about to talk about the quarterbacks, just like how Oklahoma's kind of backed themselves into a corner with the quarterback room.
Yep.
That's kind of what's happening here too. Was it understandable? Kind of at the time, sort of. Sure. Yeah. It's just like what they've done. I mean, they extended all the assistant contracts too, gave them raises. If you're coming off a 10-3 season, you're able to lock down some continuity and consistency by extending Brent Venables through 2029. Sure. There's an argument to be made that wasn't a bad decision. But doing that before a year in the SEC and now you're 5-5 and potentially looking at 5-7, now that's a question. Hindsight's 2020, sure, but this wouldn't be the money, the buyout wouldn't be as expensive, and the potential long-term ramifications of any big decisions wouldn't be here if they didn't extend him this last summer.
Right.
I don't know, man. It's also hard because we're talking about this before the last two games of the year. I don't know what's going to happen. If I'm guessing, OU's not going to win.
Right.
But is it impossible OU could win one of those games? No. How bad do those losses look if they do lose? I don't know. And the reality is we're going to be talking about this a lot over the next few weeks. The future of this program, the future of Brent Venables, which leads me to Bryan. OU does have two more games. We still have to go to Baton Rouge at the end of on Thanksgiving week. We still have to go to Baton Rouge for the LSU game. Bryan, what the hell does Oklahoma do at quarterback? Because, I mean, look, I thought Jackson Arnold was playing better. I'll just be honest with you. I certainly did. I thought he looked better against Ole Miss. It was hard to know how much stock to put into the main game, but it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
Fine's a lot better than awful. It was fine. I thought Jackson looked okay against South Carolina. He did get the ball down the field a little bit in those games. His ability in the run game was good. Bryan, that game on Saturday was awful.
Yeah.
I mean, just 15 of 24 for 74 yards, 0 touchdowns. He caught one. Sorry. He caught one. 2 fumbles, 2 lost fumbles.
Yeah.
When you average less than 5 yards per completion against a Missouri defense that had given up, I think it was 18 plays of 20 yards or more in conference play through the air, and your 2 longest pass plays of the day come from your punter and from your running back, and Jackson Arnold didn't complete a pass of 15 yards or more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man, but that leads a lot of questions to how does OU approach this quarterback room the last 2 games. Now, we talked about it before we started recording. I think you and I might have slightly different opinions about this, which is why but I don't know exactly what you're going to say, which makes me wonder how would you approach this?
Well, first of all, watching that game, it was pretty clear to me Jackson, and he should has issues trusting the offensive line. Like, it's very clear, very, very clear. There's moments in that game where he's got time and he's putting himself in danger by moving out of the pocket or not working the pocket the way that he should. How much of that is attributed to not having a quarterback coach for a good portion of the season, or somebody that hasn't ever coached quarterbacks? I mean, that's a fair question. The other thing is, and I didn't realize this until I think it was, I don't remember who I was talking to on the sideline. Um, I think it was walking back to at halftime. Uh, that was Jackson Arnold's first start on the road of his career
In a true road
in
game.
a true
Yeah.
road game.
Yeah.
So with that, part of me thinks, hey, some of that is to be expected. Um, things, we expected Jalil Farouk and Dion Burks coming back to just change things, that it didn't. Those guys did not look 100%. I mean, you could tell that they were pushing to be out there, and that's just, that comes with the game. But as far as what Oklahoma should do from here on out, there's a lot of people thinking or calling that that Casey Thompson should be the guy going forward, for the next two games. My pushback for that is, if Oklahoma felt he was going to give them the best opportunity to win, I think that decision would have been made already at some point. And Casey Thompson's not coming back next year. It's hard to say starting to play for next year, but at this point, I think with as pivotal of an offseason as you have coming up, I think you need to find out which one of those guys you can put the basket, put your eggs in that basket, proverbially speaking, and see who is the guy that you can really build behind. Or if it's neither one of them, and you say, all right, I mean, we're just going to have to cut ties. If one of those guys wants to stick around and compete, great. If not, the portal's open. We have to go find somebody else. Castellanos from Boston College just jumped in the portal. So like, there's going to be guys out there. I think you have to play. I think you have to play one of those guys, depending on who you feel gives you the best option. If it was me, honestly, I think I continue rolling with Jackson Arnold. If you feel like that's the guy with the highest ceiling in the room, um, you've gone back to him at this point, and he struggled on the road. Uh, the turnovers aren't great. They weren't interceptions, but you still have to find a way to take care of the football. You can't put it on the ground. I mean, that's like this junior high level stuff. I think you roll with Jackson Arnold, and I don't like the idea of playing two quarterbacks. I think you need to pick one and roll with it. And so you pick one of those two guys and roll with them, and then kind of just see how the cards fall. Is what I would do.
So I hear what you're saying. I do. Um, here's my thing. Here's my thing. I have seen enough this year to question the coaching staff's decisions when it comes to who's playing and who's not.
Sure.
I would also say that I think the primary reason why Casey Thompson didn't play, why he hasn't played, is because he's a seventh year senior who's not coming back. And if you believe that Jackson Arnold's your future at the beginning of the year, or that Michael Hawkins is your future, then yeah, it doesn't make sense to play Casey Thompson. It never would have made sense to play Casey Thompson unless he was just so far beyond both those guys, right? It's more than anything, it's a feel-good story of a guy who's from Oklahoma, who always wanted to play at Oklahoma, who can come in, be a veteran because to those younger guys, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if we can say definitively who gives this team the best chance to win. I don't. I don't know how anyone could make. I mean, I don't, because part of it is because we haven't got to see. We've gotten to see practice a little, not a ton, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know how we can say definitively what the thought process has been in terms of who gives this team the best chance to win. Also, it would be enough for me to. I just have questions about why is Jaquaize Pettaway not playing? Why is Caleb Hicks not played at all?
Yep.
Why did Jacob Jordan play one snap against Missouri? One snap. He played one snap. Yes, I know Deion Burks was back. I know that. But the guy that had been your most consistent and most productive receiver the last 3 games, as soon as Deion Burks is back, you give him 1 snap, not even 10, which would still be less than 15% of the game. You play him 1 snap. So, like, to me, I do have to. That's almost an aside question. Bryan, I think to me it's as simple as, do you think Jackson it comes down to 2 questions. Do you believe either of those guys are actually your guy moving forward? And do they benefit from seeing the field the last 2 games?
Right.
My answer to that question is no.
Yep.
It's not.
I would agree with you on that. On that portion, yes. It comes down to if you believe one of those guys is the future or if they're not.
So I think you have to, and it's so hard because I think also when you watch the film against Missouri, that game was not called very well. I mean, straight up, the difference between the way the offense looked against Ole Miss to Missouri,
yeah,
Jackson Arnold didn't have a ton of places to go with the ball. I would say that I actually thought the offensive line wasn't awful after going back and watching the film. It wasn't terrible. It was better than I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
But it's not like he had a ton of places to go with the ball. So of course there's always that context, right? In terms of how much has he been put in a place to succeed. But I think if you're this coaching staff, you have to ask yourselves, and maybe that even requires a conversation with Jackson. Do we think he's the guy, and is Jackson coming back? How does Jackson feel about coming back?
Yeah.
Because the reality is, this is a 5-5 football team that's going to be a 14-point underdog at best for both of these games. And I think with Jackson, that Missouri game was the worst performance of his career. It was even worse than Tennessee, which is, and so I think, to me, your question, like, I know there are going to be thoughts out there about, well, you got to let the young guys play. I would worry about harming their development almost regardless if they're coming back or not to play in these games. That was awful on Saturday. Right. It just was.
And I think in that regard, if you throw Jackson out there and he's got 2 turnovers, like if it's a Michael Hawkins situation from South Carolina, like, yeah, obviously you pull the plug and throw another guy out there. But to me, the way that I look at it is, right now, the way that Jackson responds, like, it's just going to continue to be adversity all year long. And I think if you're going to find out who your guy is, it's going to be who responds to adversity the right way. Because we've seen nothing but that at this point at the quarterback position. So if Arnold is able to fix some things with ball security, if that's a focus and they can work on that through the bye week, like, I think you at least see how it looks. But again, if there is a question whether you're willing to build around one of these 2 guys, I agree with you 100%. Like, if you have any question in your mind that Jackson's gone, like, if there's any worry or doubt within the locker room that that's a thing, then yeah, like, you put Casey Thompson out there and see if that gives you a better opportunity to try and win one of these other games. Because at this point, the other 2 guys haven't. I mean, that's just the reality. So I think there's a way of playing that, probably in between what we're both saying.
I hear what you're saying, and I think, obviously, ignoring a lot of context and a lot of ways that you could break this down, I think the simplest way for me is it only makes sense to put Jackson Arnold back out there if you really think he's your guy moving forward.
Right.
And you have some assurance or some confidence that he's coming back.
And that goes for Hawkins as well.
It does, except I think in a weird way it almost makes less sense to play Michael almost regardless, and it's not even because he is actually a true freshman. He's a true freshman. Yes, yeah, yes. It's less about his ability, and I think more about it's that weird in between of where he has played, so you have seen him in real games, but
yes,
I mean he hasn't, like, he still hasn't played a ton, and I think you could have more optimism about whether he comes back or not, or about him being moldable, I guess. Where with Jackson, it's again, yeah, Jackson Arnold hasn't played very much either. Like you mentioned, he's played one true road game. But that performance on Saturday was just so bad. I think almost even I would worry about harming their development further to put them back in games where turnover issues could really be prevalent. Or if both these games end in blowouts, I think you have to worry about their confidence. I think you have to worry about their belief in themselves, their belief in the team.
Yeah.
And so I guess the simplest way to put it is I think with Michael, it almost doesn't make a ton of sense either way. And I think with Jackson, it only makes sense to put him back out there if you really think he has a chance to be your guy. And if the answer to that question is no, I think you put a veteran out there that helps stabilize things, and then you communicate, or that could help stabilize things. And then I think you communicate it to both those guys to say, look, this is just, we don't want to put you guys back out there in this kind of season, in this type of situation. We will reevaluate things in the offseason.
Yeah.
Now Casey Thompson's had turnover issues too. But I don't agree with the notion that it would cause alarm bells if Casey Thompson were to go out there and do well or win. I just, because this room is such a mess that I don't even know how you would go about evaluating what it would have looked like if he was out there the entire way.
Right.
But I do actually, and I was pretty against this until Saturday about the idea of putting Casey Thompson back out there. I just didn't think it was a good idea for the short term. I didn't think it was a good idea for the long term. Bryan, I think I'm there, kind of. I do. I think I'm there. That's where I'm at.
I don't know. Like, I'm I'm trying to assess all of this, and it's difficult to do it in the middle of a season because you still do have 2 games left. I think the quarterback position, for obvious reasons, gets romanticized. Like that's the most important position on the football field. And that's pretty much that is at every level. But if I look at it from a roster standpoint, you have so many young guys, just a ton of young guys on both sides of the football playing right now. Freshmen and sophomores just everywhere. So with that in mind, if you do decide, Venables is back and we're hiring an offensive coordinator and all of those things, I think from the top down, you roll with the guy that you feel is the best in the room, obviously. Like, you play your best guys. And to me, it just does come down to how confident you are in the fact that they're coming back. I think if you set those 3 guys down in the room and said, what are your plans? Just be flat out honest. Like, what are your plans going forward? If they're all like, yeah, we plan on being back. Or, Casey can't come back, but those other 2 guys, if you have any question, yeah, it needs to be the best one of those. So, it's a tough spot. And I think at this point, with how the season has gone, there will be skeptics for whatever decision is made. Like, there will be skeptics of that decision because of how the season's gone.
I guess I almost come down to, I think part of what's coloring this discussion is the fact that they're playing Alabama and at LSU. If this was Mississippi State and Florida, I think I would feel a little more inclined to say, throw one of the young guys out there. But to me, I think you also have to ask, what is the most likely scenario? If you put Jackson Arnold back there against Bama, what is the most likely thing that happens? And can you imagine how awful it will feel, even more awful, if we get to halftime and OU's down 20-3, 17-3, and Arnold is 6 of 13 for 40 yards and a pick. Like, for one, he had 43 yards at halftime against Missouri, And that's because he completed, I think, a 13-yard pass right before the Schmidt 56-yard field goal, which, holy cow, let's do an aside real quick. Zach Schmidt went 3 of 3, and he had 10 yards on that kick.
Yep.
Zach Schmidt does not.
I was standing right there next to Eddie Radosevich, and we both just kind of looked at each other and said, that would have been good from 60. Like, that would have been good from 65.
Yeah. I mean, not that he deserves apologies because he wasn't very good the last 2 years, but if anybody has answered the bell to get better this year,
big time.
Let's take a half second to shout out to shout out Zach Schmidt, because it was awesome. He scored. He's been arguably one of the most consistent guys on the football team this year. Jackson Arnold had 43 yards in the first half. He had 31 yards in the second half. How much worse is this going to feel, and how much would you have to worry about things feeling even worse for him if OU gets beat, even if it's like 28-7, and he had another couple turnovers and didn't get anything going through the passing game? You know how much worse things will feel if that happens?
Yeah.
That
would be really rough.
It's Bama.
Yeah.
It's not Mississippi State. No offense to Mississippi State.
Right.
It's Bama. Well, I don't know. I don't know but I don't. Maybe you throw him out there and let him work through issue. I don't know. Well,
the other thing that I would argue though is, and this is like this could get taken out of context, and I'm sure it will, but the Alabama team coming in, I mean, they've looked great over the last 2 weeks. Like, don't get me wrong. But you have played teams of that caliber already this season. You have. Like, you have played teams that caliber, and that you were competitive against Ole Miss for a half. And really, you don't shoot yourself in the foot against Texas, and that game doesn't pile on you the way that it does in the second quarter. So, I mean, it is Alabama, but at the same time, you're getting them at home, and you've played teams that caliber to this point. Tennessee. You have played those teams, unfortunately, week in and week out, and now, you get a week to get things together. So I don't know. To me, I just think to not necessarily hide those guys from that, or to shelter them from that, because I do get the point that you're making. But I think at that point you're almost saying, like, we don't trust you anyways. So, like, is it just time to move on at that point? Would be the feeling that I would get.
Well, that's what I think you put him back out there if you feel confident he's your guy moving forward.
Right. Yeah.
If you're not, so yeah, that 100%, the decision to play Casey Thompson, if that happened, would be fully sending the message that either Jackson has said he doesn't want to come back, or Oklahoma is saying we're moving on.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, 100%. That's what that would mean.
Yep.
It's all of this is to say they've backed themselves into a corner. This is really, really difficult. Because it gets to that point where you don't want to ignore the last two games, right? And like you said, you want to play the guy that you think gives you the best chance to win. That is always a good argument. That is always a good assessment to make. At the same time, I think these two games have also gone beyond just Oklahoma winning, and also just what is going to be best for the long-term stability of the program. Bryan, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I will say I don't feel that strongly about who should play quarterback. I guess the best way to put it is I am way more open to the idea of playing Casey Thompson than I was a couple weeks ago.
Yep. Yeah.
What I will tell you is, you know who I want to see more of these last 2 weeks, regardless if Oklahoma wins or not? Xavier Robinson.
Stud.
Throw that guy on the field.
Stud.
Why did he have... Bryan, what...
I don't know.
Why didn't he
I
play?
don't
Why
know.
wasn't he on the field?
Don't
Uh,
know. The running back rotation continues to be the one position that I have no understanding of why the rotation is what it is. Um, I mean, it doesn't even make sense from like a first down, second down, third down perspective. Like it's just like random who's who's gassed, who's not. Like I mean, there's it, it doesn't make sense because you have a guy that runs the ball 8 times in a row or however many times it was on that drive. Um, I don't know. All I know is the guy has an incredible uh he has an incredible physicality to him. His center of gravity is exactly what you want in a running back. He's so hard to knock off his spot. Um, he seemed to have really good vision. He was more elusive than I kind of expected him to be. Man, he's a bruiser,
he
dude.
was just
Like,
plowing through Missouri.
and that's the thing is like I remember talking about it in the off season about how much his body had changed since he came in from high school because he came in overweight, um, and he was a guy that was, that was one of the questions: is he going to be able to cut the weight and get his body in shape to play, and how quickly can he do that? The answer is very fast.
Mm-hmm.
He's looked the part anytime they've put him out there. Um, and his instincts for a freshman. I mean, like he just if your 1-2 combination at running back is Taylor Tatum and Xavier Robinson over the next 3 years, like you're good. Like that's a duo that you really feel good about, especially with what you've seen out of Javante Barnes. Like you've got options. It's just a matter of you got to make sense of the rotation. Yeah, Xavier Robinson has definitely made enough of a statement to say he needs to be playing the next 2 weeks.
Well, I agree because, and I don't want to throw out Javante Barnes out of the equation. I know you don't either. And it's a big deal that he didn't play against Missouri. It's a big
It
deal.
is. Yeah, that's your best. He's been your best offensive player
all year.
probably all season. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big deal. And I think regardless of how good any other running back looked, you can't just not play Javante Barnes, right? But I'll tell you this, in terms of the discussion about playing the guys that give you the best chance to win, I was not moved by what he showed against Maine. Not that he didn't look good and not that I didn't think, oh, he could be somebody. It's Maine, right? Like it's Maine.
Yeah.
But when you're making, especially against an offensive line that has had its struggles this season, we talked about needing to make guys miss. Xavier Robinson not only just makes guys miss, he runs through dudes. So there's a part of me that wonders with the offensive line, the way it's struggled this season. Xavier Robinson in a must-have drive in the fourth quarter, you're down 7.
Mm-hmm.
In a must-have drive, you got to score on this possession. Who got them down the field to get them in a position to score to tie the game? It was Xavier Robinson.
Yep.
Who was dragging 3 to 4 Missouri defenders on his way to the red zone.
If you need 1 yard and it's 4th and 1, if you need 1 yard, as crazy as it seems, the freshman is the answer.
Yeah.
Like that's your guy.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why I just wonder why, because even look, they've experimented with splitting Taylor Tatum out as a receiver at times. It's just made me wonder if like Javante Barnes has been your most consistent guy on offense, and then Taylor Tatum has probably been your most explosive guy, but then you've also got Xavier Robinson. I think it would have been on this coaching staff to get creative to find them. It's not about saying Xavier Robinson should have been playing 50 snaps every game all year. It's not that.
Yeah.
But it's and I know freshmen, they want to redshirt them or whatever. I mean, if it wasn't for Xavier Robinson, Bryan, in that fourth quarter, do they get to the red zone?
Probably not.
I don't know if they do. They hadn't been doing it all game.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I just, at that point, was there just did he just not show enough early in the season? Did he not show enough in fall camp practices that they weren't confident he could help them win? Were they just too committed to redshirting him? I
I
just don't know what the
guess
answer
like
is.
to me that would be the only thing that makes sense. I think the crowd noise. I don't want to sit here and pretend like coaches make up decisions based on what the crowd wants, but I mean Taylor Tatum is was the number one back in the previous recruiting class, and then you had two veteran guys ahead of them. Um, Obviously, he's done something to jump Caleb Hicks like completely because that guy's just gone off the face of the earth.
Well, as soon as Caleb Hicks didn't play against Maine, I think we knew,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, uh, and as much run as he was getting in the spring, it just is such a like just so many questions. Um, but yeah, Robinson's a guy that has to play more. Excited about him, and
What do you want? What do you want to see? Just these last. This is the bye week. We're not previewing another opponent.
yeah,
Just in addition, these last two games again, neither of us are trying to say there's no way OU can win. We're going to go to those games. We're going to cover those games. We're going to work them
yep,
like we always do.
yep.
What do you? But assuming Oklahoma is going to be an underdog, I just what do you want to see? Is there a player? Is there a scheme? Is there a
No,
idea?
honestly, the here's what I'm looking at personally, and kind of what I would urge a lot of fans to look at as well. And this is just me being level headed after thinking about it for a while because I was just as pissed as anybody else. I mean, I was just as upset as anybody else after what I saw. Like that, you go back to the post game podcast with me and Parker, and you will see how dejected I was. I mean, granted, it was 2 o'clock in the morning whenever we were recording that, but yeah, I mean, it was heartbreaking. The thing that I'm looking for this team over the last two games is one, what's the buy-in? What's the buy-in from not just the team but the staff? Like, what is the it's really hard to fake being bought in on things.
Yeah,
Anybody that's been out there is going to be able to tell. Like, I have no doubts about Miguel Chavis being bought in. Like, that's a guy.
yeah,
I mean, he brings that energy every day. But does it correlate? Does it go? Does it pass through to the players? Do you see it on the field? Um, I think the point's been made uh, on Oklahoma Breakdown that guys like Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman, you're not really worried about the buy-in there because they have money on the line. Like that, I mean, totally agree with that. But there are so many young guys on both sides of the ball that have played a lot of snaps this year that I think seeing that buy-in and the development for those guys is big. And so, um, if they're still playing competitive football the last couple of weeks, it tells us a couple of things. One, um, if they're able to be competitive in these games, and uh, we see that level of play elevated after the bye week and going into the end of the season, like you've got young guys that are coming back with experience. That's always a good thing. Um, but two, it also tells us they're still bought in for this coach and for this
yeah,
staff. They're
yeah.
still bought in for the guys that are in the room. And that I think that would say a lot. That would really say a lot because, you know, it doesn't take a genius. If we watch these next two games and body language is horrible, I mean, all of that speaks for itself. If that's what happens and Oklahoma just gets blown out in the next two games and the body language is terrible, like he's lost the locker room. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's the case. I do believe that these guys believe in Coach Venables and um, so I would say the buy-in, and then the other thing is the rotation on offense. Like I think we know what we're going to get on defense. Like the rotations have been fairly consistent. Like We know the guys that are playing quite a bit and the guys that aren't. Um, I'm really curious to see what the rotation looks like with some guys like Eddie Pierre Louis. Now that there's only 2 games left, he didn't log a snap against Missouri, did he?
Mm.
Okay, so he has 2 games left. So obviously he's able to play in both of those games. What do the rotations with that guy, those kind of guys look like? Um, do you have healthier versions of Jalil Farouk and Dion Burks? Do they look more apart? And then really the other thing is I do I do think it's going to be really important to see who the future leaders of this team are that start to kind of like, because as Billy Bowman and Danny Stutzman progress and get through these last 2 games of their career, like that passing of the torch is going to start happening, probably in practice more than anything else. But who are those guys? Like Kip Lewis seems like an obvious answer for one of those, but like who are those other guys that really start to solidify themselves as leaders of the future for this team? So really kind of looking at those 2 things, it's probably not what you were hoping for, but like that's where my mind's at.
I mean, I couldn't have said that any better. Really good points, particularly about buy-in, because while you would expect players to be dejected after a loss like that on Saturday, it was the most dejected I've seen players and Brent Venables specifically
Yeah.
after a loss. There
Yeah.
was no rah rah. It's going to be great. We've got to get back to work. Like it was kind of like subtly kind of acknowledging the situation for what it was, which is
Right.
a devastating loss and a must-win game that they were up 7 with 2 minutes to go.
Right.
Love the buy-in point. I'm curious. You mentioned not only rotations, but I'm curious to see just how much in general we see some of those freshmen who are on the borderline for a red shirt or not. Because if Xavier Robinson plays another snap, he can't red shirt. So I think we will
For a
get.
running back, like how important is that really? But
I kind of wonder how important it is in general
yeah,
now, kind of.
yeah,
But
very good point.
but yeah, if they play some guys like if David Stone gets more snaps, if I'm not obviously he's played a little bit all year, but he's kind of been like a 4 snaps here, 3 snaps here kind of guy all year. If he gets more snaps, if Eddie Pierre Louis and Isaiah Autry didn't see the field at all, if Xavier Robinson plays, how much do they utilize Taylor Tatum? How about guys like Lewis Carter, who I think played 4 snaps against Missouri? A guy like Lou, I mean, I think I'm going to be looking at those snap counts in particular, not only just because it will be curious to see what they look like on the field in extended reps, but it would also, I think, give you slightly more insight into where this coaching staff is at, which is they're never going to punt on the season. They shouldn't and they won't. But if they give a little bit more playing time to these freshmen, is that kind of a hint of we're trying to evaluate where these guys are for next season?
Right.
I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Bryan, God, we covered so many big picture topics, and man, we're I mean, I'll be at player availability in 3 hours, so we're recording this before we get the first chance to talk to players or Brent. I think Brent is supposed to talk tonight. He didn't talk for the SEC coaches teleconference today, due to an immovable conflict, is what they said. But I think he had to walk his dog. But I think he is supposed to talk tonight. Anything else? Anything on your mind before we talk again for this pod next week?
I don't think so, man. Just, I think really the focus, obviously they're going to talk about winning and going 2-0. Like that's what you'll hear, but being competitive in those games and putting yourself in a position to win. I mean, I think if they're able to do that, that will be in context would be successful. So can't believe I'm saying that about Oklahoma. But
Yeah, this has been. I'm feeling how Oklahoma's season has looked. I'm tired and I'm
yeah,
tired and exhausted and all that stuff. But Bryan, guess what? No matter how bad things look right now or feel right now, we're going to keep doing this
that's
through
right.
the rest of the year. We're going to keep doing
All
it.
right.
It's our jobs and we like doing it and we appreciate the support of people out there, like anybody watching this pod or anybody that's a subscriber over at ouinsider.com. It is you guys that allows us to do what we get to do. And so we can't say thank you enough, and we can't express our appreciation enough for you guys that tune in every week, that help us get to do what we like to do, even when things are awful like this. So, appreciate you guys listening. Always make sure to like and subscribe here at this OU Insider YouTube channel if you've not done so already, because we're gonna keep on churning out content. So many things. I mean, recruiting, signing day. We're a month from signing day. Basketball season's underway. We still have 2 more games to cover for this Oklahoma football program. If you're not a VIP member over at ouinsider.com, never a better time to do it than yesterday. But if you didn't do it yesterday, you can do it today too. Just as good. Appreciate you guys as always tuning in. We'll see you next week on the Oklahoma Drill.